So what is DH? What are the digital humanities? So this week you're reading Miriam Posner's chapter, Digital Humanities, and in it she provides a couple of definitions, but she also, most important really, gives you a lot of examples of different kinds of DH projects. And towards the end, she talks you through the way that she designed her own DH project with students. And that's quite an interesting example for us in DCURT 207 because it involves network analysis, which we're also going to be working with. Posner presents first the definition that she likes the best, which is using digital methods in order to answer humanities questions. So the open kinds of questions that we ask in literature, history, languages, art history, and so forth, and digital culture. Another way of defining digital humanities is that it's anything that's got anything to do with digital stuff and the humanities. So that would include any studies of new media or electronic literature or studying digital culture, even if you're not using digital methods as such. So in digital culture, for instance, we use a lot of different kinds of methods. Some of them are not really digital, like you can read a work of electronic literature. Of course, that's digital to some extent, but it's not that different from watching a movie or reading a poem, for instance. And you can write an interpretation of it. So that's not necessarily digital humanities. You could also go out and interview people and analyze those interview responses, and that might also not necessarily be thought of as digital humanities, although you could certainly use digital methods when you're analyzing the interviews. But if you do things like using databases or code in any way, then you probably are verging onto the digital humanities. So I'm going to talk you through some examples of digital humanities projects, and I'm going to look particularly at three common approaches to the digital humanities. There are many, many ways of doing digital humanities. Probably, I mean, if you think you've got all of them, someone will come up with a new one tomorrow. But these three are pretty common approaches: textual analysis, databases and archives, and visual methods. So textual analysis means you gather in a lot of text. And when you get a lot of text together, it's called a corpus. If you get many corpuses, it's called corpora. So, for instance, digitizing books is one of the common ways of generating a corpus. So the National Library of Norway, Nasjonalbiblioteket, has, for instance, digitized all the books that have been published in Norway, and once you have that, you can do searches like here, and you can see, oh, Henrik Ibsen was mentioned more in around 1920, and then less again, and then more again in 2013, and you can do a lot more with it. Actually, if you're interested in that kind of work, you should go to the Nasjonalbiblioteket website and look up their digital humanities tools. They have a lot. Now, Posner mentions that a Jesuit priest was the first digital humanist, or is often referenced as such at any rate. He was a Jesuit priest, and he digitized the Bible and religious texts and generated concordances and used other computational linguistic tools to analyze these texts. In Norway, the EDB Center for Humanistisk Forskning was one of the first digital humanities places, although they didn't call it digital humanities then. The word digital humanities didn't even appear until the early 2000s. At this time it was called EDB for Humanister or Humanistisk Data or computational humanities. There were many different terms. This was the magazine that the center used or published on paper, of course. And for instance, they listed, you don't bother reading all this, but for instance, they listed all the different projects that were happening at the University of Bergen in the early 70s. So for instance, we know from this that the Department of History was, for instance, digitizing old census records from the early 19th century. So that's also an example of a kind of textual analysis. You digitize existing textual material and then you can analyze it in new ways. Other projects are at LLE, for instance. They have the place name collection, where they have audio recordings of local place names spoken by many different people over time and Also, people who live in different areas, how do they pronounce the names of other places? We've got talebanken, which is also audio recordings, but of just of general speech. And this is over time, so you can actually listen to the change in people's dialects or the dialects from certain places over time. These are examples of distant reading, which means, close reading is like when you read a poem or look at a film or something, and you interpret it closely, so you're reading it closely. Nærlesing is the Norwegian term. Distant reading means that instead of interpreting just a few words, you're looking at the big picture. And like, for instance, Ibsen was talked about more in 1920, for instance, rather than actually analysing an Ibsen play. But this work here is an example of how you can use textual analysis and computational tools to analyze, to do a close reading as well. I'm not sure if you've seen Hamilton. It's a musical, very well known in New York, about Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers and who was active in the American Revolution. And it's recently been released on Disney Plus in America, so it's been all over the internet. And the unusual thing about this musical is that it uses rap a lot. And so this analysis, which is from the Wall Street Journal, in fact, actually uses, it has algorithms that analyze the sounds in the text or in the song, and uses that to color code it to show how the rhyming patterns work. So I'll just show you this.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean, by providence impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar?
So that's a fairly different kind of textual analysis, right? But you can see, and if you scroll down through this whole thing, I'll put the link on the web. Then it goes through all these different ways you can analyze this, and it shows how rap music typically uses not only end rhymes, but these other rhyming schemes and other sounds in order to connect the sound and make the words really work together. So it's a really interesting way of using digital humanities, I think. Okay, another approach is databases and archives. And here, Posner notes that often archives, databases in digital humanities have been celebrating, the canonical figures, the national heroes, like Ibsen, who, of course, there's an Ibsen archive, and it was one of the earliest digital humanities projects in Norway. These things are super important, but often there's so much emphasis on these sort of nation building canonical figures that other things get left out. But recently there's been more focus on actually bringing forth the things that maybe have been hidden a bit and documenting the things that people might not have seen as much. So here in Bergen, for instance, we have Skeivt Arkiv, which is an archive of queer history in Norway. And they have both a physical archive, but they also are digitizing a lot of their material and gathering new material digitally too. Another example is the Slave Voyages databases, which are a digitized version of the records, the very, very detailed records that slave owners and slave traders kept of this horrible trade. And you can learn more about this in the interview with Jessica Marie Johnson. She also writes about it in the paper, which you're also reading this week. Here in Bergen, we have the Elmsit database, which you'll also be working with this semester. Now, this is not an archive. It doesn't actually house the electronic literature. It is a database of metadata about electronic literature. There's some source code and so forth in here, but the main point of this is to be more like a library, because electronic literature doesn't have a library other than these databases. So here there is information about each of the works. A lot of metadata has gone in there. And you can use this data and export it and generate visualizations, for instance, and do different kinds of distant reading, much as you can with, for instance, the digitized corpora that the National Library has. Now, the third approach, and the last one I'll talk about right now, is visual methods and cultural analytic, which I think is quite an interesting mode. Lev Manovich is one of the people who's done a lot of this. This is, for instance, Time magazine covers, and you can see each cover is very small, but they're organized according to time along the x-axis, and the y-axis on the up and down, it's showing brightness or saturation. So if a dot is higher up, it means that the magazine cover was more saturated if it's in color, or brighter if it's in black and white, as the earlier ones were. And so you can actually see there's this sort of undulating pattern here where more or less every decade you get more saturated covers, and then it goes back down to be less saturated, and this increases, and it's sort of an interesting pattern that you can see in there. Manovich has also done projects like Selficity, where he scrapes images off Instagram and then uses facial recognition algorithms to let you sort them according to how the head is tilted, whether the person is wearing glasses or not, whether their mouth is open, whether they're smiling, and so forth. And from this, he can say things like, you know, people in Moscow don't smile as much as in Rio, and people in this city tilt their heads more. One of the criticisms of this sort of research, and this sort of research is really fun and sort of interesting methodologically, but one of the criticisms is also that you end up kind of reinforcing stereotypes, because like, yeah, is anyone really surprised that people don't smile as much in Moscow as in Rio? It's sort of, it gives us data that sort of just sort of repeats these stereotypes we have, and maybe doesn't give us any really new knowledge. If you're interested in that, go to the Selficity website and read Elizabeth Losch's paper. She has a feminist critique of the project, which is published on the project website. An example Miriam Posner talks about is Ceylan's Women. This is a video essay, which is a genre, it's a scholarly genre that is just, you make a video. This video, I mean, it's worth going and having a look at. What the author has done is take all the images of women who are looking at something or being looked at in the films that are made by the director Ceylan. And when you watch it, I mean, it's quite an evocative thing to watch, but it also does say something about, wow, there are a lot of women looking in these very specific ways. By just putting the examples after each other like that, you start to see some patterns that might not have been immediately apparent if you were just watching the movies in a regular way. And this is actually a bit related to databases, because what you are doing when you do something like this is you take out little bits of the films and then you put them together in your own way. So it's a different way of thinking than your standard close reading or interpretation. I think it also has a lot to do with really just online digital culture. This is just a Tumblr search for Scum back when it was running. So Scum being the Norwegian teen drama series that was wildly popular. Now, a lot of fan activity about shows they enjoy is actually very interpretative. For instance, the bottom image in this here, this is a fan-created juxtaposition of two images. The bottom one is from Scum, from that episode towards the end of season 3, where Isak is in church and gets text messages from Evan, and it's a very moving moment. It's a bit unusual in a Norwegian church to see a sort of blue neon cross like that, but fans quickly found the reference, which is to Baz Luhrmann's production of Romeo and Juliet from the 1990s, which is a film that the Scum film quotes again and again. And so simply by, rather than writing out an argument, the fan response is this very digitally native thing of you just put the images next to each other. Here's another example of fan analysis towards the end of season 4, when everything is terrible and Sana, who's that season's main character, is just in tears, and we're very worried for her. Then instead of writing out a long analysis, the fan interpretation is to juxtapose 4 images from the 4 different seasons, showing each of the main characters at exactly that point towards the end of the season. All alone, deserted, very sad, but we know that things are going to get better and they're going to get together with the group. And so I think this is a beautifully sort of digital form of interpretation. Now, this obviously isn't digital humanities as such, but there's some really interesting fan interpretation out there. Oh, well, this sort of supercut. So this is a supercut of just 50 heartbreaking movie moments, which is basically the same genre as that video essay, which is only quotations from a movie. I'm not sure this has much analytical purpose other than to make you want to cry, so I'll just keep going. My own project, big research project at the moment, is about machine vision. And we're also building a database where we've identified different kinds of machine vision. And here are some icons we had drawn to represent the different kinds. And what we're doing is building a database where we're pulling out data about how different science fiction games and stories and artworks are representing machine vision. So this is, for instance, the night vision glasses in the Hunger Games, for instance. And I'll tell you more about that later. So that was a number of examples of digital humanities projects. Hopefully during this semester you will get a much broader understanding of what digital humanities is and can be. What I would like you to do now, either go ahead and read Miriam Posner's chapter on digital humanities, or if you've already done that, then I would like you to look at Jessica Marie Johnston's Markup Bodies, which is a paper which I'd like you to read, but there's also a video interview with Jessica Marie Johnston specially made for this course, which I find really interesting. So please go ahead and read that now. Bye.